Hello and welcome to the podcast, MIB Crypto. In this episode, we're talking about Ethereum, the $400 billion experiment. We're also talking about how 8 founders created Ethereum and how one of them walked away. In 2013, a 19-year-old programmer had an idea, not for another cryptocurrency and not for another digital payment system, but for something much bigger. A computer that didn't belong to Microsoft, it didn't belong to Google, didn't belong to Apple, and didn't belong to any government. A computer that would exist on thousands of machines around the world with no single person in control. His name was Vitalik Buterin, and the idea would eventually become Ethereum. And here's where the story gets interesting. Ethereum wasn't created by Vitalik alone. There were 8 original co-founders, and one of them was Charles Hoskinson. Hoskinson believed Ethereum could become a major commercial enterprise. Vitalik had a very different vision. And eventually the disagreement became so serious that Hoskinson left the project entirely. Then he did something that would make his story even more remarkable. He built his own blockchain, Cardano. So 2 men who helped create Ethereum eventually became leaders of competing cryptocurrency ecosystems. One stayed and one walked away. And the argument they had in those early days was really an argument about something much bigger than Ethereum. It was a debate about what cryptocurrency itself should be. This is the story of Ethereum. To understand Ethereum, we have to go back to Bitcoin. In 2009, an anonymous person or group of people using the name Satoshi Nakamoto released Bitcoin. Bitcoin's purpose was revolutionary but relatively focused. Create a form of digital money that didn't require a bank. You could send Bitcoin directly to another person.
Let's take a look at where things stand right now.
No bank had to approve the transaction. No central clearinghouse had to maintain the ledger. Instead, thousands of computers around the world maintained a shared record. Bitcoin had effectively created a decentralized financial network, and one teenager became fascinated with it, Vitalik Buterin. Vitalik was born in Russia in 1994 and grew up in Canada. He discovered Bitcoin as a teenager. He became deeply involved in the cryptocurrency community and eventually founded Bitcoin Magazine. But the more he studied Bitcoin, the more he saw something that he thought was missing. Bitcoin could transfer value, but what if the blockchain could do much more? What if it could run software? What if it could execute agreements automatically? What if you could build applications on top of it? Vitalik began working on the concept, and in late 2013, he published the Ethereum white paper. His proposal was revolutionary. Ethereum would be a blockchain with a built-in computer. The computer would be capable of running programs called smart contracts, and those smart contracts would create entirely new applications. The idea attracted attention almost immediately, and soon Vitalik wasn't working alone. Ethereum eventually recognized 8 original co-founders: Vitalik Buterin, Charles Hoskinson, Gavin Wood, Joseph Lubin, and Anthony Delorio, Mihai Alil, and Amir Sherrod, and Jeffrey Wilk. Each brought something different to the project. Vitalik was the original visionary. Gavin Wood became one of its most important technical architects. Joseph Lubin helped build the organizational and commercial ecosystem, and Charles Hoskinson brought a strong interest in the business and organizational side of the project. For a brief period, these people were working toward the same goal. But they didn't necessarily agree about what that goal should ultimately be, and that disagreement would eventually split the group. Imagine for a moment that you're Vitalik Buterin in 2013. You believe you've discovered something extraordinary. Bitcoin has demonstrated that a decentralized network can maintain money, but you think the same technology could create something much larger. A platform where anyone can write software, no permission required. No company needs to approve the application. No government needs to host it. The network itself executes the code. That was the dream. Ethereum wasn't supposed to be simply another digital currency. ETH was going to be the economic fuel for this new decentralized computer. But there was a problem. Someone had to turn the idea into an actual organization, and that's where Charles Hoskinson became particularly important. Charles Hoskinson was one of the original Ethereum founders. Unlike Vitalik, who was primarily focused on the technological and philosophical possibilities, Hoskinson was also thinking about something else. How do you build a real organization around this idea? How do you raise money? How do you structure the company? And how do you bring developers together? How do you create something capable of surviving? These weren't philosophical questions, they were practical ones. And Hoskinson believed Ethereum needed a more conventional commercial structure, a company, investors, a business model, a way to turn Ethereum into a substantial enterprise. But Vitalik and others saw Ethereum differently. They wanted the project to remain fundamentally open source and nonprofit, and this wasn't a minor disagreement. It went directly to the heart of what Ethereum was supposed to be. Was Ethereum going to be a company, or was it going to be a public technology? And eventually, the disagreement became impossible to ignore. This is the moment Ethereum's history takes a dramatic turn. Charles Hoskinson left Ethereum. The man who had helped create the project was suddenly no longer part of it. The disagreement wasn't simply personal, it was philosophical. Should Ethereum be operated primarily as a commercial enterprise, or should it operate as a nonprofit foundation developing open source technology? Vitalik's vision won. Ethereum proceeded as a nonprofit project, and Hoskinson walked away. But here's where the story takes an extraordinary turn. Hoskinson didn't abandon blockchain technology. He decided to build his own, and eventually that project became Cardano. Today, Cardano and Ethereum are often discussed as competitors, but their rivalry has an unusual origin. One of the people who helped create Ethereum eventually left and built another blockchain because he disagreed with the direction Ethereum was taking. Think about that. The competition didn't come from outside, it came from inside the founding team. While the philosophical battle was unfolding, Ethereum still had to be built, and Gavin Wood became one of the critical people responsible for doing that. Wood was a programmer and computer scientist. He helped formalize Ethereum's technical design. He wrote the Ethereum Yellow Paper. He helped develop the Ethereum virtual machine, and he created Solidity, the program language that became central to Ethereum smart contracts. This was enormously important because Ethereum wasn't just supposed to store information, it was supposed to execute instructions. Think of Ethereum as a computer distributed across thousands of machines. You write a program, the network executes it, and the results are recorded on the blockchain. That became the foundation for what would eventually be called decentralized applications. Now we go to the question many people ask. If Ethereum is a computer network, why does it have a cryptocurrency? The answer is the computer needs fuel. Suppose you want Ethereum to execute a smart contract. That computation requires resources. If it were free, someone would flood the network with millions of meaningless requests. So Ethereum charges users for computation. Those charges are called gas fees, and gas is paid using Ethereum's native cryptocurrency, ETH. ETH, therefore, isn't simply an investment asset, it is part of the operating system of Ethereum. You can use it to pay transaction fees, you can transfer it, applications can use it, and today ETH is also used to help secure Ethereum through staking. But when Ethereum first launched, that security mechanism looked very different. When Ethereum launched in July of 2015, it used proof of work. This was the same basic security model used by Bitcoin. Computers, called miners, competed to solve difficult mathematical problems. The miner that successfully solved the problem earned the right to add a new block to the blockchain and received cryptocurrency as a reward. Why make the process so difficult? Because the difficulty creates security. If you wanted to attack the network, you'd need enormous amounts of computing power and electricity. The cost of attacking the system becomes the defense. But there was a problem. As Ethereum became larger, proof of work required enormous amounts of electricity, and Ethereum developers began working toward an alternative, proof of stake. Proof of stake changes the equation. Instead of saying, show me how much computing power you can control, it essentially says, show me how much ETH you're willing to put at risk. Under proof of stake, Ethereum uses validators. Validators stake ETH and participate in securing the network. If they behave correctly, they can earn rewards. If they attack the system or violate certain rules, they can lose some of their stake. So the two systems are fundamentally different. Proof of work uses physical resources. Proof of stake uses financial resources. Proof of work consumes large amounts of electricity. Proof of stake requires capital to be locked up in the system. And Ethereum eventually decided to make the switch. The merge, September 15th, 2022. For Ethereum, this was one of the most important dates in history. The event became known as the merge. Ethereum had been running proof of work since its launch. Meanwhile, developers had built and tested a separate proof of stake system called the Beacon chain. Then the two systems were merged. Ethereum switched from proof of work to proof of stake. The miners were gone, validators took over, and Ethereum's energy consumption dropped by approximately 99.95%. Think about the significance of that. Ethereum didn't create a new blockchain and abandon the old one. It changed the fundamental mechanism securing a massive blockchain network while billions of dollars were depending on it. It was one of the most ambitious software upgrades ever attempted in cryptocurrency. But Ethereum's story didn't end with the merge. In fact, that's when another phase began. Ethereum's problem became, how do you make a decentralized computer capable of handling enormous numbers of users? The answer increasingly became Layer 2 networks. Instead of processing every transaction directly on Ethereum's main level, Layer 2 systems can process large amounts of activity more efficiently and then use Ethereum as the underlying settlement and security layer. This is a crucial part of Ethereum's future. Ethereum doesn't necessarily need to process every transaction itself. It can become the foundation underneath a much larger ecosystem. The Dencun upgrade in 2024 introduced blobs, helping reduce the cost of data associated with Layer 2 networks. And Ethereum continued upgrading in 2025. Pectra, Fusaka, and now additional upgrades are being developed. As of 2026, Ethereum's developers are continuing to pursue higher capacity, lower cost, and a much simpler user experience. And this brings us to the real Ethereum experiment. Ethereum is a gigantic bet. The bet is that blockchain technology can become infrastructure, not just cryptocurrency, not just speculation, infrastructure. For finance, for payments, for tokenized assets, for applications, for digital ownership, for decentralized organizations, and potentially for parts of the internet itself. But there are no guarantees. Ethereum faces competitors, it faces technical challenges, it faces regulatory uncertainty, and it still has a usability problem. The average person doesn't want to understand gas. They don't want to understand Layer 2s. They don't want to understand bridges, and they don't want to manage complicated wallets. They simply want technology that works. Ethereum's future, therefore, depends on whether developers can hide the complexity. Because the ultimate irony of blockchain may be this: the technology could become massively successful only when most people don't even realize that they're using it. And this brings us back to Charles Hoskinson, because Ethereum's early disagreement wasn't really about a few lines of corporate paperwork. It was about what the future of blockchain should look like. Vitalik Buterin believed Ethereum should remain an open, decentralized platform. Charles Hoskinson believed that there was value in a more conventional commercial structure. They went their separate ways. Hoskinson built Cardano, Vitalik stayed with Ethereum, and today their two projects represent very different approaches to building blockchain infrastructure. The irony is remarkable. Ethereum's future was partly shaped by a founder who left, and one of Ethereum's future competitors was created by the man who walked out. So let's go back to that 19-year-old programmer. In 2017, Vitalik Buterin imagined something that sounded almost absurd: a decentralized computer that nobody owned. 8 people helped turn that vision into reality. Vitalik Buterin, Charles Hoskinson, Gavin Wood, Joseph Lubin, Anthony DeLorio, Mihai Ailil, and Amir Chettirat, and Jeffrey Wilk. But the founding group didn't stay together. Hoskinson left, others went off to build companies and other blockchain projects. Gavin Wood eventually created Polkadot, Joseph Lubin built Consensus, and Charles Hoskinson created Cardano. But Ethereum survived. It launched in 2015. It created a programmable blockchain. It created smart contracts, an economy powered by ETH. It survived enormous market crashes and survived technical failures and controversies. And in 2022, it pulled off one of the most extraordinary upgrades in cryptocurrency history. It abandoned proof of work and moved to proof of stake. Today, Ethereum is attempting something even more ambitious. It wants to become the foundation beneath a global digital economy. Whether it succeeds remains one of the biggest unanswered questions in cryptocurrency. But perhaps the most interesting part of the Ethereum story isn't the price of ETH. It's the argument that started at the very beginning. What should this technology actually become? A company, a currency, a computer, a financial system, or something that doesn't yet have a name? Vitalik Buterin and Charles Hoskinson couldn't agree on the answer, so they went their separate ways. And now, more than a decade later, we're still watching to see which vision wins.